Hey everybody, this is Brian Cognato with Senior Corps, and we are, looks like just 1 minute past the half hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Before I dive into things, I do see that we have some people in our webinar, and I always like to test and make sure that my voice and us here at Senior Corps are getting through loud and clear. If somebody who has joined us via the webinar can give me a smiley face or a thumbs up or an okay or anything at all in the chat box of that webinar, it would be really helpful before we go on to just let me know that I'm coming through okay. All right, thanks Leah and Jeff. I see we've got some smiley faces there. That is fantastic. I'm glad to see that. We're going to go ahead and start by talking about some housekeeping notes. First of all lines are on mute at this time. So if you can't hear yourself, you're trying to say something, don't worry, that's okay. It's supposed to be that way. The session is being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, you can disconnect at any time. And we'll post the recording the same place you found the description and registration of this link on a page connected to our RSVP competition page. And I will show you where that is at the end of the call. Every so often we do hear of users who have audio or video problems as they're joining. For audio problems, the first thing to know is that there are two ways to join. You can either join via your computer and get the audio that way, or you can call in over a touch-tone phone. And I'm going to paste the call-in information into the chat box right now. So if you are joining over the webinar, you have that information as well. If you find that your audio is not great in one way, go ahead and try the other way, and that will usually work for you. If you have any video problems, they're infrequent, but we do understand that they happen. The best thing you can do is disconnect and then reconnect, and that generally takes care of it. In terms of asking questions today, we do want to encourage you to ask questions. We're only going to be taking questions via the webinar chat window today. So that's the best way to join, the best way to get an interactive experience here today, is to go to the Managing Senior Corps Grants page, or sorry, go to the RSVP competition page, I should say. And I'm going to go ahead and post that link in the webinar box as well, and find the link to connect. It's nationalservice.gov/RSVP competition. Because of the number of people and some technical issues, that is the only way we're going to be taking questions today, is via the chat box. That said, go ahead and feel free to drop them in at any time, and we will answer them as we go. Go ahead and drop them in once again at any time, and we'll answer them as we go. One caveat to add, because we are talking about a competitive process here, a competition for federal funding, is we are limited in the types of questions that we can answer. We'll be sticking mostly to clarifications and references to published material. We can't answer questions like, should my program include this in the application? Really, anything program specific, we're not going to be able to answer. We will, at the end, again, show you where you can submit some questions that maybe we don't have a chance to get to today. That's all for housekeeping. And now we just want to say welcome and hello. As I already said, my name is Brian Cognato, and I'm Senior Course Program Officer for Training and Knowledge Management. And I've got my colleague with me here, Tamika Becton. Tamika is really our guru for all things competition. Tamika, do you want to say hello?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining.
Thank you for joining, Tamika. We are really excited to have you all join here today. I'm guessing on the line, we'll find out in just a second, but I'm guessing we've got some people who know Senior Corps really well and have worked with us for a number of years, and we've probably got some people who are brand new to the National Service community. If you are brand new, we really do want to welcome you. Just by being here, you're demonstrating an interest in using service to improve your community, and that means that you really are part of this National Service ecosystem that we're so proud of. If you're a long-term Senior Corps grantee, we're really excited to be able to offer you this opportunity as well, and give you a chance to expand your impact. With that in mind, I'm actually going to ask for a little bit of participation via the webinar. And the first thing that I would love is if everyone who does have access to that chat box could let us know their name, the name of the organization that they're with, and the state they're joining from. And just go ahead and drop it in there so we can see the good cross-section of people that we have here with us today. Once again, that's your name, the organization that you're with, and the state that you're joining from. Okay, I'm starting to see some things come through. I see an RSVP from Oklahoma, a AAA from Pennsylvania, a tribal organization from Alaska, the Sitka tribe. I see United Way of the High Counties, I think. I see Connecticut. I see another Pennsylvanian there. I see an Indianan. Sorry if I'm not seeing you. It's all coming in pretty quick. Well, fantastic. It looks like we do have a pretty good cross-section of different organizations and different types of organizations, I should say, in different states too. We're going to do something a little bit different once again. You should see on your screen very soon a poll pop up. And what I'd like you to do is go ahead and choose which one of these you think is relevant to your organization. We want to know how much you know coming in here. We're curious if you are a current Senior Corps grantee, if maybe you're a current grantee of the corporation but not Senior Corps, if you've heard of us but maybe you're not working with us, or if you're just brand new to this whole world of national service. Okay, and I think everyone can see the results who's joining us via the webinar. It looks like we've got a pretty decent mix. Mostly Senior Corps grantees at the top end of the spectrum and people who are brand new at the bottom end of the spectrum. Really appreciate you giving us that little bit of context before we move on. Obviously, because it is a mixed group, we're going to try to really target our presentation to people who don't know anything. We're going to start from the very beginning. So apologies if some of this is a bit of a review for some of you, but that's okay. A review never hurts. Okay, you should see the slides coming back up on your screen any minute now. Here's what we're going to try to accomplish today. As I already mentioned, we do know that this is a mixed group, but we're really going to try to cover the basics. And we're going to assume that we need to just introduce the whole idea of CNCS, the agency that we work for here, and the national service community to everyone. So we're going to spend some time at the beginning doing that. Then we're going to walk forward and be a little bit more specific and talk about Senior Corps and RSVP. My guess is almost everyone here is here because they were interested in a funding opportunity for RSVP, a current notice of funding opportunity that is open. So that's really where we're going to spend the bulk of our time. At the very end of the call, we're going to review some basic highlights from that notice of funding opportunity. Do note that this is only one of many training and technical assistance opportunities that we're hoping to offer. We'll talk about what some of the others are later, so that we're not going to be able to cover everything that you want to know here in the next hour. We could never do that. However, there are going to be plenty of other opportunities for you to get the information that you need. With all that said, let's go ahead and introduce the Corporation for National and Community Service. The mission of the Corporation for National and Community Service, also known as CNCS, you'll hear me use that term quite often, is to improve lives, strengthen communities, and foster civic engagement through service and volunteering. We're an independent federal agency that helps millions of Americans improve the lives of their fellow citizens through service. We work hand in hand with local partners to tap the ingenuity and can-do spirit of the American people to tackle some of the most pressing challenges facing our nation. National service engages citizens in problem solving. We use competition like the ones that you all are interested in right now to fund high-value programs. We leverage substantial outside support, and we mobilize volunteers to multiply impact. Through all of our programs, we mobilize 5 million volunteers and leverage hundreds of millions of dollars of non-federal resources from businesses, foundations, and other sources. And this is the community that you all are being introduced to right now, and that we hope to be able to welcome many of you to. And if you already are a Senior Corps grantee, the community that I hope you're as proud as I am of already being a part of. We focus on pressing social problems to expand opportunities for Americans of all ages and backgrounds to serve. We hope to build the capacity of individuals, nonprofits, and communities, and we embrace social innovation. We recognize that national service will have its greatest impact if we target resources on a core set of critical problems and carefully measure our progress. To that end, we've prioritized 6 major challenges: disaster services, economic opportunity, education, environmental stewardship, healthy futures, and veterans and military families. Those are focus areas across the entire Corporation for National and Community Service. You'll see that some of them have 2 asterisks, particularly economic opportunity, education, and healthy futures. And that's because you'll see those echoed in funding priorities in the current RSVP Notice of Funding Opportunity. We'll talk more about what that means, but these are where CNCS is focusing all across the country on these 6 areas. We do that through 3 different programs. AmeriCorps, probably our best known program, engages more than 75,000 Americans in intensive service each year and nonprofits, schools, public agencies, and community and faith-based groups across the country. The Social Innovation Fund, which was authorized in 2009, empowers organizations to identify and support sustainable solutions that are already making a significant impact in transforming communities. Finally, Senior Corps, the program that I know we've already got some participants here from today, and that's the program where we're really going to be focuses on engaging Americans 55 and older in service in their communities in a variety of ways. And these are just the 3 largest programs at CNCS. In actuality, there are a lot of smaller programs with things going on as well. So for example, Martin Luther King Day just recently passed, and we have another push around recognizing Martin Luther King Day as a day of service. Some of you may have seen that. So these are just the 3 biggest programs, but there's actually a lot more going on here at CNCS to support service and civic engagement. Of course, we don't have a whole lot of time to go over all of the different programs of CNCS, but if you want more information, you can go to nationalservice.gov, and there you'll find lots of other resources, including profiles of our impact in each state, contact information for local staff. We have local staff in almost every state and many territories as well, and our social media contacts. If you want to learn more, please do go ahead and look up that information. Now let's talk about Senior Corps and RSVP. Senior Corps is the nation's largest organization for volunteers 55 and over. Projects can be found in every state, as well as the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. All told, Senior Corps volunteers support more than 70,000 nonprofit and public agencies across the country. Again, all with that focus on engaging people 55 and older in service to their communities. Overall, almost 270,000 Senior Corps volunteers work across the country to meet a wide range of community challenges. They do that through 3 major programs. So just like CNCS has 3 major programs, Senior Corps has 3 major programs of its own. The Foster Grandparent Program, the Senior Companion Program, and what we'll be mostly focusing on, RSVP. The Foster Grandparent Program engages older Americans as role models, mentors, and friends to children with exceptional needs. Volunteers serve at thousands of local organizations to help children learn to read, provide one-on-one tutoring, mentor troubled teenagers and young mothers, care for premature infants or children with disabilities, or help children who have been neglected or abused. Eligible volunteers in that program may receive a small stipend to defray the costs of their serving. You may actually have seen one of our more famous foster grandparent volunteers in the news recently, really just last year. If you saw the quote-unquote dancing grandma, a woman, her name is Virginia McLaurin, who met President Obama and Michelle Obama, I should say former President Obama and Michelle Obama last year, danced in their office. She's a 106-year-old woman right here in the Washington metropolitan area who is a long-serving foster grandparent. So if you saw any of those video clips, I wish our technology was just a little bit better. Video doesn't work quite so well over this connection, but I really do encourage you to go ahead and search for Virginia McLaurin, and you'll see some fantastic videos of a long-serving, really powerful, impactful foster grandparent volunteer. The Senior Companion Program is very similar, but the focus, instead of being on youth, is really on other older Americans. Senior Companions provide assistance and friendship to adults who have difficulty with daily living tasks, such as shopping or paying bills. We help these adults remain independent in their homes instead of having to move to more costly institutional care. They give families or professional caregivers much needed time off from their duties to run errands, and they provide friendship as well. And just like the Foster Grandparent Program, eligible volunteers may receive a small stipend, which is a little bit different than the RSVP program, as we'll discuss. But we know this is really probably what you all came here for. We want to introduce you to the entire National Service family and all of the programs that occur under the banner of Senior Corps. But my guess is that all of you are here to learn about the RSVP program, and in particular about the current Notice of Funding Opportunity, which is open and really accepting applications right now. We're going to spend a fair amount of time on this, so we'll divide it into 3 more sections. We're going to give a high-level overview of RSVP. Then we're going to talk about how RSVP works. And finally, we're going to talk about some budget considerations that go into an RSVP program. RSVP was established in 1971 and engages people 55 and older in diverse volunteer activities. So these are just some examples: tutoring children, renovating homes, teaching English to immigrants, assisting victims of natural disaster, providing independent living services, recruiting and managing other volunteers. Honestly, we could go on for a long time listing different types of service activities that RSVP volunteers do, because it is our most flexible program. RSVP volunteers are doing a very wide range of service activities all across the country, really based on community needs. That's the key part of RSVP. Overall, 230,000 volunteers nationwide are serving in more than 600 RSVP projects. It's a large, vibrant community, and we thank those of you who are on this call who have helped to make it that way, and we're excited to welcome even more members to that community through this competition. We are a federal grant program, as we've already discussed, and that means that there's some specialized vocabulary that you will get used to as you acquaint yourself with the world of RSVP, including some acronyms. What's a federal program without acronyms? And the first one that we should mention is NOFO, or Notice of Funding Opportunity. This is equivalent to what in other contexts might be called a request for proposals or a request for applications. It's our statement to the world that we are open for new business, that we are looking to make new grants to achieve a specific purpose, in this case to support RSVP activity. Other key terms, and by the way, you can find all of these key terms in Appendix C to the NOFO, to the Notice of Funding Opportunity. That's where you can find all of these. But other key terms for you to know: our sponsor, which is the term we typically use for a grantee, an organization that receives a CNCS grant; a volunteer station, which is a public agency, a secular or faith-based private nonprofit organization, or a proprietary healthcare organization that accepts the responsibility for assignment and supervision of RSVP volunteers. A sponsor itself can also serve as a volunteer station, and we're going to look at some of the ways that that can play out a little bit later. RSVP volunteers are the people who serve through RSVP projects. An advisory council is a group of persons that a sponsor organizes to ensure community participation. It can take a lot of different forms, and projects can also use other organizational structures like a board of directors to meet that goal. But the important thing is that there is a body of people who have the responsibility to make sure the program meets local needs. Finally, I already mentioned that CNCS really prioritizes measuring our impact and measuring the performance of our grantees. And so you'll see that there's another set of terms all related to performance measures in Appendix C that it's going to be really helpful for you to acquaint yourselves with. Things like theory of change, outcome, output, terms like that. You can find them in Appendix C, and we'll also have other resources that actually speak to them. But that's a language in and of itself that I really encourage all of you to get acquainted with. So that's a very high-level view of RSVP in general, but let's get a little bit more detailed and talk about how RSVP works in practice. Projects are run by a program director at the sponsoring organization, and the RSVP program assesses community needs and leverages RSVP volunteers to meet those needs, right? So you match volunteers to needs. Volunteers serve at volunteer stations in a specific geographic area, and that can include the sponsor itself. I mentioned we were going to talk a little bit more about stations. They are nonprofit organizations, proprietary healthcare facilities, or public agencies, and sponsors, grantees, may develop a wide range of stations dispersed throughout a geographic area, or they may actually choose to focus on a couple specific stations or service activities. As I've already said, a sponsor can be a station itself, and RSVP sponsors sign memorandum of understandings with these local organizations, with these stations, and sends them volunteers. So that's basically how it works. Let's look at how this works in a more visual way. And we're really going to talk about two different models, two different ways to structure an RSVP program, and then we're going to kind of break that down. But just to be really simple, we're going to start with one model, which I'm calling the multi-issue and multi-station RSVP. In that model, CNCS makes a grant to a sponsoring organization, and then that sponsor recruits RSVP volunteers and places them at other organizations that serve as stations. And those stations could be radically different types of organizations doing very different things. For example, one could be a food bank, where volunteers could help prepare meals for the needy in that community. And another could be a school where sponsors tutor children. And in that case, you would hope that both of those are community needs. But the stations can be independent organizations doing different things, and the sponsor's role is to recruit those volunteers and then place them at those external stations. And again, they could be doing a wide range of activities. So that's one way to think about an RSVP program. But there's another way to think about an RSVP program. What you can think of as a single issue self-station RSVP. So in this example, it's going to be a little bit different because we're still giving the grant to the sponsor, to the grantee, but then maybe that sponsor just goes and recruits volunteers to work within that sponsor. So maybe the sponsor is the station, and maybe they're just focusing on one issue area. Maybe all they do is education or nutrition, to use some of the examples earlier. Maybe they just have one issue, and they're just placing volunteers within their own program. That's okay too. And of course, we're just talking in models, we're simplifying things, but the fact is that you can combine different elements of both of those and mix and match in any number of ways. So you could, for example, have an organization that maybe does work with external stations, but only focuses on one issue area. Maybe they're all schools. Maybe there's an RSVP program that works with a number of different schools in the community. Or you could have them work at programs internally, but it's a lot of different programs. Maybe your agency, your organization does a lot of different things, and you're still just placing volunteers within yourself, within your own programs, but you have them doing lots of different things. That might look a little bit something like this. So we're still granting funds to that sponsor. That sponsor's still going out and recruiting volunteers, but they could be placing them at other stations, other community partners, or within their own programs. The key is, and here's what's really, really, really important, is that there's a local presence and capacity to meet local needs, that you are able to demonstrate community needs for what these RSVP volunteers are doing, and that those are documented and supported in your application, that you have strong relationships with community partners, and most importantly, that you're leveraging volunteers to realize outcomes and make a difference. That's what RSVP is all about. Leveraging volunteers to meet real community needs, and I should say to further the mission of the sponsoring organization. Now that's all a little theoretical, a little high level, looking at diagrams and figures. By now you're probably wondering, if you're new to this community, okay, I think I get it. What I really need are some specific examples. And the good news is that there are lots of places you could go to get some specific examples. The first place we're going to recommend is the National Service blog. You can just go to nationalservice.tumblr.com and search RSVP. And I just pulled screenshots of 3 projects that happened to come up when I did that search a few days ago. You can go there right now. You might see different things. Just in these examples that were on the blog when I went there was one focusing on children at school, at work, and in their lives. There was another that was working on osteoporosis, something very health-focused. And there was a third with a veterans coffee house, so really working on serving our veterans and their families. And those are, again, just 3 of many, many examples that you can find on our blog that I just happened to see when I last visited. We also have a transparency website, and my colleague Tamika deserves a lot of thanks for what's available on this website, where you can actually look at a database of awards and applications. So you can go to the URL that you see up on the screen right now and do some searches and see real RSVP programs and applications. That's a public database that's available as part of our commitment to the American taxpayer that you all can use in considering your project and shaping your application. Finally, we're planning another series of trainings from February 21st to February 23rd, where we're really going to try to raise up some more specific examples of RSVP programming. And in fact, we're going to try to target them to the funding priorities that you will see in the NOFO, in that Notice of Funding Opportunity. So I've got some colleagues who are really working on this. I see one has actually been able to join us here today, Robin. Robin, thanks for joining us. This is going to be another great opportunity for you to see some more specific examples of RSVP programming if you're not already familiar with it. We haven't broken down exactly the dates, what we'll be talking about on which date, but as you can see, there's a link to sign up for an update when we do announce that. And again, at the end of this call, I'll also show you URLs and really take you through where you can find all of this information. So I've done a lot of talking. We've moved through a fair bit of how RSVP works and some different ways to think about programming. I'm curious, we've got a number of people in our webinar here. If anyone wants to share what they are thinking RSVP volunteers might do or even are already doing. What do volunteers do, or do you think volunteers maybe could do for your programs? Feel free to just go ahead and drop whatever's at the top of your head in that chat box. We do know that it's a competition, but don't give away any secrets. Just if you have some ideas about what volunteers might do in your community with your organization, feel free to share them right now. Okay, great. Thanks, Kathy. Some capacity building for nonprofits. Perfect. Great. That's something that we haven't talked about. I think maybe people are a little shy. I think we can understand that given the context, and maybe you're just starting to think about this. So again, I do know that we went through that pretty quick. But that's because there's a lot that we want to share. But there are going to be plenty of other opportunities to get a sense of what RSVP can look like in your community. And I'm just going to step back because I do want to emphasize what I think. Okay, great. I see another example, escorts on public transit. Thanks very much, Sherry. And these are just, ideas, right? What's most important at the end of the day is that there's a local presence of the organization, that you're working towards addressing demonstrated community needs, you have community partnerships, and most of all, that you're using RSVP volunteers to realize outcomes and make a difference. Okay, I see another capacity building suggestion. I see Wanda also looking at transportation. Great, thanks very much, guys, for sharing those examples. When all of this comes together, oh, and I see another one, a mobile food pantry, really interesting. When all of this comes together, it really unleashes some fantastic things. There are benefits to the sponsor, to the grantee, to the organization that receives an RSVP grant. You can leverage volunteers to better meet your mission. You can build the capacity of your organization, something that we already had some people mention, capacity building for nonprofits. You join the national network, this national community service, this national service community of organizations all across the country who really see the power of service and volunteerism. Oh, and I also see another suggestion about a mobile soup kitchen. Really interesting. You can strengthen other public and nonprofit agencies in your community. Again, it seems like that might already be on some people's minds. And you can demonstrate competitive programming. I'm not going to lie. Federal grants sometimes can take a little bit of work to manage and a little bit of savvy to manage and even to successfully apply for. So if you get a grant from CNCS, my experience is that is a very nice thing to be able to talk about when you go out and talk to other funders and partners in your community. It really demonstrates a high level of capacity and ability to manage programs, fiduciary responsibility. There are a lot of good things that go along with it. And of course, there are lots of benefits to the volunteer. They get to have a real impact on community needs, a real impact, and that's so important. They can make friends and build new connections. You can offer them flexible opportunities that match with whatever else they have going on in their lives. And there's a growing body of research that says that health and happiness are actually both positively affected by volunteering, that volunteering can really make our older Americans healthier and happier. They also have the opportunity for certain kinds of cost reimbursements for example, certain types of insurance. You can do recognition activities. You can reimburse them for meals and transportation. I mentioned this is a little bit different from some of our other programs. If there's anyone here who works with the foster grandparent and senior companion programs, they, in addition, can earn a stipend if they meet certain income eligibility requirements. That's not part of RSVP. We don't have that stipend. But there are other certain more specific cost reimbursements that are available to volunteers. So that's why you should do it. But there's another important aspect of how RSVP works that we should talk about here, and that's the Code of Federal Regulations. I hope I've gotten you at least a little bit excited about the potential of RSVP, about all the great things that volunteers could be doing in your community. But again, we are a federal program, which means that we have to abide by a certain set of rules that come down from legislation and that we put into something called the Code of Federal Regulations. It's the source of the requirements that govern Senior Corps grants and actually govern us here too at the corporation. We also have to follow these rules. It's the codification of general and permanent rules published in the Federal Register by executive departments and agencies like CNCS. The Code of Federal Regulations is the part of the Code of Federal Regulations that that governs RSVP is 45 Part 2553, which you'll typically see abbreviated as 45 CFR 2553. If you're one of those people who at the beginning of the call told us you're brand new to federal programming, you're brand new to the national service community, this CFR thing is something you're really going to want to spend some time getting to know because, again, it's the rule book. It's the rule book for managing one of these programs, and in particular, 45 CFR 2553. If you want to learn more, if you want to read this, the best way to do that is to go to the eCFR, which is just at ecfr.gov. And there you can look up Title 45, Part 2553. They're easy to search, and they're written in an easy-to-understand question-and-answer format. And they are important, critically important rules and regulations that guide the RSVP program. We're just going to share a couple of examples of particularly important regulations, but that does not mean you should not go and read all of the regulations. Can't stress that enough. Because of time, once again, we're only going to share a couple of examples, but I strongly encourage you to go and learn more. First of all, there are some service activity restrictions. There are some things that RSVP volunteers cannot do. RSVP volunteers cannot replace paid staff. They cannot have volunteer activities that are political in nature, including influencing elections or voter registration activities. RSVP volunteers cannot give religious instruction, conduct worship services, or engage in any form of proselytization as part of their duties. Also, the sponsor cannot use grant funds directly or indirectly to finance labor or anti-labor organization or related activity. If it sounds like I was reading those verbatim, it's because I was, and that's because they are really, really important, and I would not want to misstate them. So please do know that while RSVP is very, very, very flexible, there are some things that they cannot do. And these 4 things, to be specific, they cannot do. Replacing paid staff, engaging in political activity, engaging in religious activity, or labor and anti-labor activity. Another regulation that we're going to spotlight are criminal history check requirements. Criminal history checks are required for RSVP project staff, any staff that you are thinking about building into your budget, and almost all RSVP programs, probably all RSVP programs, do have some staff costs associated with them. They are not required, but they are recommended and allowable costs for all volunteers. And we've got an extensive website with lots of resources for help you to learn more about that. It's one of the examples that we want to highlight here because it does have budgeting implications. You are going to need to put this in your budget, these checks, particularly for staff, and then if you choose to do so, for your volunteers as well. Once again, those are just 2 examples of our regulations. There are many more, and they're important as well, so please do read the full regulations. Finally, let's talk about some budget considerations. And before I get into budget considerations, I just want to remind you that you can ask questions via the chat window at any time. We haven't gotten any questions yet. I really appreciate your participation, but you can ask questions as well. When it comes to the budget, right, we've talked about what you can do, and now we need to talk about what you can pay for, what these funds can go towards. And here are some examples of possible budget items for RSVP. Funds can be used to support an RSVP director, to set up recognition events, and to recruit new volunteers. They can be used to communicate with volunteers and stations through newsletters or support travel. RSVP funds can also be used to support travel to training opportunities. All grants are subject to the Uniform Guidance, also known as the Uniform Administrative Requirements, also known as 2 CFR 200. Once again, you should recognize that kind of citation by now. That's coming from the Code of Federal Regulations, that big rule book that governs how our programs, and in this case actually all federal programs, need to operate. We have a website just dedicated to the uniform guidance, which, as you can see here, has some other names too, the OmniCircular or the Super Circular. These are all different names for the same thing. And these really govern how you can spend RSVP funds. They are consistent, actually, in large part across all federal programs. So for more information, you can go to that URL to learn more. This opportunity, RSVP programs, does have a match requirement. 10% of the total project budget for the first year, 20% of the total project budget for the second year, and then 30% of the total project budget for the third year. So it's phased in. It's incremental. It's an incremental phase-in process. If you are a current RSVP program, you'll be getting a whole new grant, and you'll have the same match requirements for the new service areas served in that grant. So once again, starting with 10% in the first year, 20% in the second year, 30% in the third year. The grant award covers 3 years, and CNCS will generally fund the first year. Funding for additional years is dependent upon satisfactory performance, demonstrated capacity to manage the grant, compliance with grant requirements, and availability of appropriations. Once again, because we are a federal program, our funding is at the discretion of the U.S. Congress. After 3 years, service areas funded through this competition will be eligible to compete in some required competition after that. So there will be a competition after that 3-year period. Okay, so we're about to move on to our next topic, but I do see that we've got a couple questions. Thank you very much for these questions. The first comes from Jose, and it's where can we find a sample budget? We don't have a sample budget handy, ready today, but that's a great example of a question that you can go ahead and submit to the general Q&A mailbox, and we'll show you how to do that at the end. Carol asked for an organization that already has an RSVP grant. This would be another RSVP grant under the sponsor, so there would be 2 grants. Yes, that is correct. This would be a separate grant. Jennifer asked, can we be assured that funding for year 1 actually exists via the federal budget? Tamika, do you want to go ahead and answer this one?
Yes. So in the notice of funding opportunity available for this fiscal year, we have approximately $3 million for RSVP competition, and you'll see that. I'm not looking at the NOFA right now, but you'll see that on one of the pages in regards to how much funding that we have specifically for this competition. So yes.
Great. And I'm going ahead and I'm looking at the NOFA right now because we should be able to find out pretty quickly the exact number and quote from it. The exact amount of funding available is $3 million. Tamika, you are right on point. $3 million. That said, Tamika's absolutely right. That said, availability of congressional appropriations is always a factor. We cannot read crystal balls and say what will happen today, tomorrow, next week, or next year. So $3 million are available. Okay, let's see. Can other similar programs be run at the same organization if it is for a different capacity? I'm not quite sure I understand that question. Sounds like it might be a great one to put in the mailbox where you can maybe add a little bit more context. Is the amount of the requested funding $75,000 per year or for 3 years? Tamika, do you want to go ahead and answer that?
Yes, and actually he has the award period up. So yes, that's the minimum amount that you come at, the 75. If you come at 75, which is the minimum, that would be 75,000 per year. So year 1 would be 75,000, year 2 would be 75,000, and year 3 would be 75,000. So you're receiving that baseline, whatever you come in at, you're receiving that for the subsequent years, for year 2 and year 3. So I hope that answers it, Candy.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Juan asked a question about advisory boards and if they can be the same for two different grants. And that's actually one that I'm going to say is probably best addressed after the competition. Because what's most important about an advisory board is that it responds to local needs. So I think that that's going to vary based on some of the geographic impacts of this. So I'm going to ask that that's probably one that's best addressed after competition, should you be so successful, depending on the specifics. Jose asks about allowable activities and is fundraising allowable activity. That's a great question, and I'm going to point you back to the CFR, where we talk about all of our allowable activities. I wouldn't want to shoot from the hip and answer that incorrectly. Okay, I see another question about counties. We're going to get to that. I'm going to ask for that. And then Donna asks if there's a maximum request. Tamika?
There is not a maximum request, but you do have to consider that two big things. One, whatever you're requesting, you have to make sure that you're meeting that match for year one as well as the subsequent years for year 2 and 3. So whatever you request, that means that you're going to have to make sure that you meet that match, as well as you have to have that cost per volunteer. So if you're asking for $1 million, then you have to make sure that you have the appropriate amount of volunteers for that $1 million that you are asking for, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
So let's move ahead a little bit. We're starting to get some questions, unsurprisingly, that really do want to know a little bit about what's actually in the NOFO, and that is our next topic. And I think that some of these questions will be a little bit clearer after we go over some of this information. So let's move on ahead a little bit and spotlight some key pieces from the Notice of Funding Opportunity. First, as I already said, to find the Notice of Funding Opportunity, you can go to nationalservice.gov /RSVP competition. I'm going to drop it right back into the chat window again. nationalservice.gov /RSVP competition. And the most important thing about the Notice of Funding Opportunity is to read the entire Notice of Funding Opportunity. Please read the entire Notice of Funding Opportunity. Please read the entire Notice of Funding Opportunity. It is absolutely critical. I can't tell you how often we here, either at this agency or I've worked for other agencies before, see applications for programs that look really interesting, but they don't follow the directions in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. And if that's the case, we can't make those grants. You must follow the directions in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. So please do take the time to read it completely. And in addition, even though we're doing some training now, and we'll show you some other training opportunities later, we won't have time to talk about every sentence in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. So it's really critical for you to take it out, print it off, get a pen, get a highlighter, mark it up, and really acquaint yourselves with it well. That said, let's go over some highlights. If you intend to submit an intent to apply, that's due March 7th. It's not required, but it's highly encouraged. And you can find out how to submit that in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Applications themselves are due April 4th, 2017 at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Eligible applicants include non-federal entities, and we have a list of them here: Indian tribes, institutions of higher education, local governments, nonprofit organizations, and states. You'll see CFR references, again, Code of Federal Regulation references, something you're going to get very familiar with, or you can find specific definitions for all of those. You do not have to be a prior recipient of federal funds to apply. You do have to have a DUNS number and register in the system for award management. If you don't know what those are, if you're not familiar with those, see the
Notice of Funding Opportunity.
Thank you, Tamika. The Notice of Funding Opportunity. That's where you can find out how to get those things. They are both free of charge. Your application has to meet certain requirements as well. You have to be an eligible organization, as we just discussed. It has to be submitted by the application deadline. You have to submit an application for a valid geographical service area, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. You have to have not been denied Senior Corps funding in the past 3 years and not be delinquent on a federal debt. You will see the NOFA spotlights 3 funding priorities. These are areas where we are particularly looking to prioritize for funding. I want to say right off the bat, you do not have to propose service in these funding priorities. You do not have to do that. We welcome anything that meets community needs. That said, when you have a limited amount of money and requests in excess of that, you do need to focus somehow. So these are the funding priorities. Evidence-based programming, which is programming that has met a very high standard of evidence, generally that has gone through a quasi-experimental or experimental evaluation to demonstrate that its theory of change has the impact it intends to. Elder justice, which is mitigating the potential that clients and caregivers served by volunteers will be victims of fraud, abuse, or neglect. And education, specifically intergenerational programming. You all may remember those focus areas that I mentioned earlier, and education was one of them. So here we see an intersection between our corporation-wide focus areas and the funding priorities in this NOFA. That would be increasing older adult engagement, like RSVP volunteers, with young people in the areas of school readiness and K-12 success. Access to care and opioid abuse is another funding priority, as well as transportation, focusing on the access to preventative medical appointments or other services that allow individuals to live independently. And finally, economic opportunity housing. That's providing services for individuals who are economically disadvantaged, including individuals who are homeless, to transition into safe, healthy, and affordable housing. I mentioned that we're going to have trainings later, this RSVP in Action series, that share more examples, and we're actually going to try to connect them directly to these funding priorities. So you can see more about how RSVP programs could target these kinds of needs. Let's talk geography for a second. Next to the Notice of Funding Opportunity, you will see Appendix A. And Appendix A is a list of available funding opportunities by state. Programs proposed have to serve those counties, the counties listed in Appendix A, and we will not fund programs that don't serve those counties. The geographic areas are limited for this competition. That said, they're quite widespread. I don't know if they're in every state, but in almost every state. And you need to go to Appendix A to see available counties in your state. So I did see we had a question earlier. Can a single applicant apply for funding for several counties? Yes, absolutely. But you do have to draw from that list of counties in Appendix A. Tamika, did I miss any important points on Appendix A?
Nope, that's all. I will say that the reason, because this could come up, the reason that some counties may not be available in Appendix A is because they're currently being served by a current RSVP program. So if your county isn't up there, then that means that it's currently being served by an RSVP program. So just keep that in mind when you are looking at Appendix A. Because I know I've gotten questions already. Why isn't my county up there? And it's because that it's currently being served by an RSVP program. So keep that in mind for the available funding opportunities.
Okay, thanks, Tamika. Performance measures. I've said a few different times now that CNCS really prioritized measuring our performance. And that's for a lot of reasons. One is that helps us improve, helps us make sure that we're really addressing needs in the communities in an effective way. It also helps us tell our story to the American taxpayer, and that's really important, right? These are funds that are paid for by you and me and Tamika and all of us together. These are our federal taxpayer funds. So, of course, we want to know that they're having an impact, and we want to be able to tie that investment in impact in the community. And so you'll see in the Notice of Funding Opportunity a description of performance measure requirements. And what you'll see is that there is a certain amount of dollars that need to be spent on unduplicated volunteers performing certain kinds of activities, particularly activities that result in outcomes in most cases. That's really what we're looking for, funding of volunteers that results in outcomes. Now, we could spend, and we will spend, entire hours just on this topic, so we can't really go into it in too much depth. But what we do want to highlight is that it's important. As Tamika already said, in some ways it kind of functions as a cap on the amount of funding you can request because there's a certain requirement about how much funding you can have relative to the number of unduplicated volunteers that you have in certain kinds of activities. So while there's not a hard cap, there's a ratio. a ratio between unduplicated volunteers and funding that needs to be met. And you actually have a lot of flexibility within that cap about how you allocate those volunteers, what you have them doing. More information is available in Appendix B to the Notice of Funding Opportunity. That's where you will find our performance measure instructions, and that is also going to be the topic of a later call. When it comes time to submit your application, all applications must be submitted through eGrants, which is our electronic grants management system. You can find information on how to access that in the
Notice of Funding.
And the NOFO. There's a hotline for technical questions and a URL there. There is a deadline for attachments. We do really very strongly encourage you to prepare to submit early. Please prepare to submit early. It is never, ever, ever a good idea when you're working with the technical system to wait until the last minute. Submit all funding, or sorry, I already said that. There's a page limitation, and you'll also find selection criteria and the selection process inside the NOFO. So please take some time to review all of those. We're going to spotlight some of our other opportunities for technical assistance, and I do see that we got a couple more questions that we'll return to. As I've said a few different times, all the information is at nationalservice.gov/RSVP competition. There's an email address where you can submit questions, 2017 rsvp@cns.gov. And there's also going to be several more technical assistance calls. I'm going to change what you're seeing on the screen right now, and we're just going to take a quick look at our NOFO website. So when you go to that website, nationalservice.gov/RSVP competition, this is what you'll see. It's got 6 sections, got some information about the deadline, and most importantly, it has the NOFO itself. That is the key document, the document where you can really find everything you need to know about this competition. It also has the list of available counties, Appendix A, performance measure instructions, Appendix B, and the terms and definitions that we already discussed. Finally, we have another section about training and technical assistance that sends you to another page. I'm going to click on that so you can see some of the other opportunities that we have planned. You can see we're going to have a session that focuses more on the Notice of Funding Opportunity itself next week. That will be followed by the RSVP in Action series, which we already talked about a little bit, and you can register there to be notified for the final topics for those courses. We're going to be doing repetitions of some of these sessions, and what I really want to emphasize is we'll talk about performance measures specifically in March, and we also have a session planned on eGrants. If you're interested in those, please do go ahead and register. That helps us make sure that we've got enough opportunities for everybody who wants to join. So please do register for any of those if you're interested. We've got about 7 minutes left, so plenty of time for some additional questions. So please go ahead and drop them in. I see we already have some. Norma asked, do the volunteers have to live in the counties designated in Appendix A? Tamika, do you want to answer that?
Yes. So, Norma, your volunteers do not need to live in the designated area, but they have to be able to, you have to be able to show that there's local presence there. So, if it's a neighboring county, and they're coming from a neighboring county that's just right across the line, then that's perfectly fine. You want to make sure that you're not inconveniencing your volunteers and they're driving an hour to their volunteer station. I mean, some may do it, but you just have to make sure that you're, when you're recruiting, that you're trying to be accommodating to the volunteers as well.
Great. Let's see. Donna asks, if she proposes to have 1,500 and proposes to have the correct number of volunteers, is it possible she would be funded at a smaller amount, or would I just not be funded? In other words, I think she's saying, if I apply for a certain amount, can I be guaranteed to get that amount, or maybe will I get less funds? And I'm actually going to go ahead, Donna, and recommend you submit that to the mailbox. When it comes to things about funding, I think that that's really important for us to get documented and communicated to everybody. Wanda asked about the connection between the new funding priorities and what's in Appendix B. She notes that they're not all directly addressed there. And the key is actually is once you choose the service activities those volunteers are going to do, well, then you've got to go and connect it to the performance measures. You'll also see that you have some flexibility. So you can program volunteers in a performance measure that's called Other Community Priorities, so you can do that. And in addition, you mentioned that there's no intergenerational specific performance measure, but there are for education. So it's just a matter of kind of connecting the dots. And that's something that we'll talk about a little bit more in later training opportunities as well. Sherry asks about how funds are accessed monthly, quarterly, or at the end of the contract year. It's through a system called PMS that is probably a little bit too complicated for us to really describe in full here. There is some information, I believe, about that, Tamika, correct if I'm wrong, in the Notice of Funding Opportunity.
Yes, and there is a document on the actual website, the NOFA webpage, that kind of goes more into detail about the payment and the access and things like that. It is located, I'm trying to think of what the name of it is. It is on the RSVP, nationalservice.gov/RSVP, and if you scroll down to resources, I believe, on that page, then you'll see something that says recipient payment for instructions or something like that. So it kind of goes into the process for SAM and PMS, and that's the payment management system. So it does go into detail about that, but you can definitely send that question as well to the mailbox, because I think that that's a good question that can be shared for everybody to see if
Great.
They're not on the call.
Thanks, Tamika. And there's a whole other, actually, a set of resources that we haven't talked about a whole lot. And the resources really geared towards current RSVP programs, but that might be helpful also for people who are thinking about applying to familiarize themselves with, get a sense of what you're getting into, for lack of a better term. And it's called Managing Senior Corps Grants. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste the URL for that here as well. But of course, you can just use your search engine of choice and search for Managing Senior Corps Grants. And you can find a wealth of opportunity or a wealth of resources about really the day-to-day management of RSVP. Candy asks about the full-time project director. Expects to work exclusively with RSVP volunteers or projects, or can they also work on other volunteer activities? That's a great question for the email box too. The idea is if they're full-time RSVP, we would expect them to spend all of that time on their RSVP program. But there is the option to request a waiver for part-time. Molly asked about indirect cost rates. For those of you that have approved indirect cost rates, you can use them. There are other options too, and actually the Managing Senior Corps Grants page is a great place to go to find more information about that.
I will say for the indirect cost rate, if you do have a negotiated indirect cost rate with another agency that you've gotten approved for, make sure that you're sending that. That is one of the requirements as a required document. So make sure that you're sending that to the RSVP attachments email box for that. Because if you do have one and you want to use that rate, then make sure that you're sending that, because it is a required document. And that can... The required documents is listed in the grant application instructions, so keep that in mind as well.
Thanks. Jose asked if the presentation will be available on the web, and if so, when? Absolutely. We have recorded it. That recording will be posted within 7 days, and you'll actually probably be able to find the slides on the same page where we had all the training opportunities by tomorrow. So both the slides and a recording will be available. In addition, this is actually one of the webinars that we're repeating in March. And Kristen asks if stations need to have a physical address in the county or just volunteer opportunities available. Tamika?
Yes, they do have to have a physical address in the county because that's where your volunteers are going to be serving. So, yes, they have to be in the county. Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, so yes, the station does have to be in the county because that's where the volunteers are actually serving. That's where you're committing to where that community need, it goes back to the community need that Brian was saying, that community is in that county, that's where it should be. You should be focusing on, basically.
And Kristen, I think that's another great question for the mailbox. Okay, that's all the time we have. We did get through a fair number of questions, so I'm really happy. For those of you who are still here, we're going to put a quick little survey up on the screen because we want to know how we did, basically. So please take just a second and fill out this quick one-question survey before you go. We're going to be signing off now. Thanks for everyone who joined us. Apologies, I do see some last-minute questions coming through. If we haven't answered those, please do use that mailbox, and we'll get answers out there for everyone. So thanks for those questions. Please do go ahead and fill out the survey. We'll be signing off, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and your interest in the National Service community. We're thrilled to have you here, and for those of you who are in the National Service community, we're thrilled to offer you this opportunity. Have a great afternoon, everybody.